observations which would further enrich the discussion, especially from the point of view of theoretical framework that we need to understand the complexities of Indian federal system, especially the complexity of Indian federal system when it is evolving with the or evolving within the context of a changing party system. Principles of fiscal federalism and their application in India's federal finance. This is, to my mind, one of the most pressing challenges of India's federal market economy in terms of ensuring subnational autonomy, efficiency, and macroeconomic stability. Because it is this framework of federal finance which determines whether the power is truly decentralized, whether the power is being truly shared, and whether the balance is being struck between national integration and regional autonomy, which is the key foundation stone of federalism, federal system, including fiscal federalism. So the question is whether India's framework of federal finance is structurally flawed or is it being politically manipulated? Or is it both kind of a double blow? Another question is whether the opposition states are facing systemic discrimination or there are broader constraints on all subnational economies. Again, whether both these features are there, all the states are facing constraints on their economies and the opposition ruled governments are facing systemic discrimination over and above those constraints, so adding insult to the injury. And another question is whether in a system where fiscal centralization is deeply institutionalized and self-rule and shared rule both are weakly institutionalized, is it possible to reform fiscal federal system in a way that we can increase or enhance the fiscal autonomy of subnational government, grant them independent revenue raising power? While these are important questions, but the fact remains that fiscal federalism is not just about the revenue expenditure assignment, not just about intergovernmental transfers, not just about revenue sharing. It is about the survival of our pluralistic democracy. It is about intergovernmental trust, as Narendra Nagarwalji has also pointed out in his paper. When this trust erodes due to the lack of transparency, lack of predictability, lack of autonomy, fiscal federalism is reduced to a nominal arrangement, a constitutional fiction, and a facade for fiscal unitarism. So, in the context of India, the fundamental challenge of fiscal federalism is the existence of unresolved vertical fiscal imbalance. which is a structural mismatch between revenue raising power and spending responsibility. Another challenge associated with this is the presence of vertical fiscal gap, which is reflected in financial shortfalls of the states, which is reflected in dissatisfaction of subnational government in terms of the magnitude as well as the design of intergovernmental transfers and revenue sharing mechanisms. The introduction of GST in 2017 has further reduced states' ability to raise independent indirect taxes. So again, in this context, the question is whether high levels of vertical fiscal imbalances and high levels of vertical fiscal gap are actually unavoidable features of India's federal or fiscal federal architecture, or whether they are being deliberately shaped by political considerations. Again, actually, India, just as in any federal country, we see that some degree of vertical fiscal asymmetry is inevitable and even required. But when we study the case of India, we find that the substantial substantial degree of this vertical fiscal asymmetry is politically driven. Many instances have been quoted by Director Nagarwalji, and I would add and enrich all those examples. For instance, when the Court Finance Commission formula took effect on 1st of April 2015, the Union government very quickly proceeded to take steps to offset the impact of this removal. It reduced its contributory share in centrally sponsored schemes from 75% to 50%, without reducing actually the number of subsidies. It increased discretion in the system, which is reflected when you look at the data on ad hoc grants, which are most discretionary. When we study discretionary dimension of India's fiscal federalism, many economists look at centrally sponsored schemes and central plan schemes. But these ad hoc grants are most discretionary. So these ad hoc grants increased from 2% of total transfers in 2014-15 to 12% of total transfers in 2019-20. Similarly, statutory census charges, which are obviously not shareable, not part of the equal pool, they increased from 10% to 12.62% of gross tax revenue in 2016-17, immediately after the implementation of the existing financial consolidation. And then after COVID, this percentage further increased to 15%, which means that effective share of the union government is increasing continuously, from 59% in 2014 to 64% in 2016 to 66% in 2021. And most recently, Modi government, in its submission to the 16th Finance Commission, has suggested that the share of the state government should be reduced from 41% to 40%. And if this suggestion is accepted, it would be for the first time that this share would be reduced. And this may be contrasted with the demands of the states who have demanded that their share should be increased to 50%. of the individual poor. But the central government is citing its own spending needs. And in this document, the central government has also cited its fiscal deficit, which is 4.8% in 2024-25, which is more than the deficit of the state governments, which is at 3.2% of the GDP. Another condition is that the federal grants should be linked with the spending conditionality, which means that if the state government spend on cash transfers, loan waivers, subsidies, they would not qualify for federal grant. Another instance we have seen in COVID how the central government refused to pay GST compensation in 41st GST Council held on 27 August 2020. And after a lot of pressure from the opposition governments, finally the central government agreed to borrow and pass it on to states as back-to-back loan. Then in 47th GST Council meeting, the state governments requested extension of GST compensation, but this request was obviously rejected by the center, again citing its own revenue constraints, expenditure commitment, plus expected fiscal consolidation on the part of the state government. Whereas state governments were citing their revenue constraints and fiscal pressure. This illustrates the asymmetry in Indian federal system between states' financial needs and central government's revenue priorities, and this also illustrates the structural dependence of the state government. Beyond vertical fiscal imbalances, there is another dimension of India's fiscal federal system, as it is in the case of all countries, horizontal dimension, horizontal fiscal imbalances. In this dimension also, we notice that wherever it is possible for the ruling party to exercise its discretion in distribution and allocation of funds, it indulges in what may be called pot barrel politics. In simple terms, distributive fiscal politics. This kind of distributive fiscal politics has been found to be very responsive to the type of party system we have at the central level. For instance, when there is a dominant party system, the ruling party, it becomes easy actually for the ruling party to indulge in particularism, which was known as punishment regime during Indira era, and the same thing has been talked about under the Modi government as double engine government. Negative aspect and positive aspect of it. Punishment regime was in the context of opposition states, and double engine regime, double engine government is in the context of the affiliated states. But we have also seen that during the coalition governments, some sort of universalization of these discretionary grants takes place, universalization of the welfare spending takes place. In any case, in that government also we have seen that the ad hoc grants, this is the finding of one of my own research, that even during the coalition era, when it is difficult to play this politics of particularism, the national ruling party tries to channel more and more ad hoc grants to the states where own party chief minister is the ruling. So, as it has been pointed out in Harinder Nagarwal's paper as well, that Modi government is not the first to undermine or curtail state autonomy. It has been practiced in the past as well, especially during the one dominant party system, and more specifically during Indira Gandhi's regime. Before 1991, fiscal federalism was operating within the paradigm of command economy. where the incentives of the ruling party were different and the entire practice of fiscal federalism worked on a very different logic. So, fiscal centralization and political discretion was easy to achieve in that kind of a system, context, background, foundation, or framework. And theoretically, in a free market economy, actually it should be difficult for the government to make use of these two tools than it is in a command economy, because the states must be empowered towards the phenomena of the race to the top. There is a very substantive discussion on the form and substance, difference between form of cooperation and substance of cooperation. Externally, if they are agreeing on each and every decision, cooperation would be visible externally, superficially. But internally, in the background, it is possible that something else is going on. So it can be tacit cooperation, where the other party does not even think of opposing because of the power equation. It can be imposed cooperation, where the other party is aware that there is some kind of an overreach by the other party, but that party cannot retaliate, cannot react, and know that there is no other option. So, imposed cooperation. It can be negotiated cooperation, which is what we mean when we talk about cooperative federalism. And then there is another extreme which is called contingent cooperation, where the state governments, the rules and state governments or regional governments, call the shots, they become very powerful. So this is the another extreme. So in tacit cooperation, we see the phenomena of subnational subordination. In imposed cooperation, we see the phenomena of subnational participation. And it is in the negotiated cooperation that we see the phenomena of subnational empowerment. So then within the framework of negotiated cooperation also, there are several variables. I won't go into the detail of, because